Thank you for joining me on this presentation, an introduction to the ocean we want, and working towards an ocean positive future through the Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is David Obura. I'm a marine ecologist working on coral reefs based at the organization CORDIO East Africa in Mombasa, Kenya. And I'm going to speak from a range of experience I have around coral reefs and ocean monitoring processes, and also getting indicators into decision-making processes such as an IPBES and IUCN indicators. In my presentation, I'll go quickly through a range of topics under the status and trends of ocean biodiversity, covering a wide range to provide some inputs into the discussions we're about to have in the Substa. And then from that lead into a quick overview of the next decade for oceans, the broader context for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and then ending with the potential for an ocean positive future. I'll start with the HE target achievement using some of the ocean relevant indicators reported in the Global Biodiversity Outlook that came out in mid-2020. I've selected a range of 10 of the target indicators here to highlight those related to oceans. And you can see from the results that were obtained that by and large the results we had were that some progress or even no change was made in achieving the targets across a lot of these indicators. There are two indicators in particular that we're even moving away from the target in pollution and nutrients and climate vulnerable ecosystems. But there were a couple of success stories in protected areas, target 11, and policy and participation, target 17, but these specifically related to development of policy and instruments, but not in relation to their implementation and positive biodiversity actions on the ground. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. 2020 was also important for the Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 14 in particular on oceans adopted some 2020 targets from the HE targets, and you can see that these performed in relation to the HE targets as well, with several showing no change, one with no progress, some progress towards the indicator, but good progress on track achievement for conserving at least 10% of coastal marine areas by 2020. The foundation for these high-level indicators are indicators such as these, reported through various global assessments. So the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species is perhaps the foremost biodiversity indicator that is used. And here we show the red list for invertebrate and vertebrate marine species compiled in one of the blue papers for the high-level panel. These show the degree of threat across these various taxonomic groups that have been assessed in the past. So predominantly you see the green colors, so least concern and near threatened, but a large proportion of data deficient taxa within these taxonomic groups. And in fact, these are the most comprehensively assessed of marine species around the world, and a significant number of vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered species amongst these groups, and extinct, as you can see, for some mammals and birds. The IPBES Global Assessment compiled some summary statistics on the condition of key marine habitats, and so showing here in red the proportion of coral reef, mangroves and seagrasses that are remaining intact globally, the proportion being 50% for coral reefs and seagrasses, but already down close to 20% for mangrove forests. In relation to fisheries, the FAO compiles the global statistics. In the State of the World Fisheries, we can see that fully 95% of global fish stocks are either overfished or maximally fished sustainably, and less than 5% might be underfished. The trends in these statistics are alarming. Impacts are spreading and drivers are increasing. So looking across a range of different indicators at ecosystem and species and population levels, we can see that on decadal timescales, declines of 5 to 15% are typical across many of these indicators. One indicator of prey fish biomass shows an increase over that period, but that's only because of the decline of predators feeding on that prey. And if you look geographically spread across the globe, we can see that the spatial extent of high-level threats is extreme. So in red we can see across almost all tropical and equatorial coastlines high impact to the high richness areas that are most important to most coastal countries around the world. And in green and blue one can see low impact regions, a lot of them in the open ocean or in southern waters that so far have received less impact, but our footprint is growing. The main drivers of biodiversity loss are well established in the IPBES and this high-level panel document. So overexploitation and human pressures in coastal environments and exploitation in the open ocean, and increasingly climate change and ocean acidification are growing in importance and may take over soon as the most significant drivers of decline in marine ecosystems. And in spite of all this knowledge and advances recently, there are major gaps in our understanding of the distribution of species and habitats in the ocean, and many aspects of the threats to them remain poorly known. And so this really highlights both the urgent need for change in terms of the drivers and the urgent need for precaution in terms of how we manage biodiversity and ecosystems. It's of great importance to look at the climate biodiversity nexus increasingly now, and this was highlighted especially in this special report on oceans and the cryosphere from the IPCC in 2018 that showed how profoundly biodiversity is impacted by climate change. This burning embers diagram is perhaps is one of the best known figures coming out of this process. We can see how warm water corals, the groups that I work on, already at current levels of warming, that grey stripe along the bottom, are already experiencing significant and perhaps irreversible changes to their distribution and health. Soon after warm water corals, the kelp forests, seagrass meadows, epipelagic or surface water ecosystems, rocky shores and salt marshes will also be impacted. And as we climb higher up the warming trend, these impacts will extend to many more marine ecosystems. The percentage change in total animal biomass is also strongly impacted by climate change. On the left we can see that under the best scenarios of change, or RCP 2.6, we see some declines in animal biomass in tropical and equatorial zones. But if we allow climate change to continue to the worst levels, the business as usual scenarios in RCP 8.5, tropical and even temperate regions will see declines of 20 to 30% in animal biomass due to climate change. And this will significantly alter what people can do and the benefits we can receive from those ecosystems. But also, biodiversity has a significant impact on climate change itself, both through mitigation and adaptation options. So elements of nature that sequester carbon, such as mangroves, seagrasses, and plankton, could have critical roles in coming decades. There are elements of nature that support adaptive capacity, both of nature and natural systems, and as well of people that are dependent on them. And the sustainability of these functions is critical, and this requires natural processes to be maintained intact at certain levels, and for conservation to really focus on maintaining ecosystem function under a changing climate. This brings us to the need to invest in implementation, because the effectiveness of management and interventions is essential for biodiversity to persist and for ecosystem functions and services to continue to act and benefit people. So we can already see that resourcing is not adequate. We saw that in the HE targets and the SDG targets that came due in 2020. But this figure from the high-level panel illustrates how the area protected as a proportion of country exclusive economic zones is correlated with their GDP or their income levels in the top graph, but is not correlated with the diversity that is contained within those EEZs. So the distribution of resources is not adequate for dealing with the challenge. Hence the importance of innovative and new approaches to conservation and the development of other effective conservation measures. Now this map shows the efforts of Canada in designating 54 sites as of June 2018 as OECMs. And these constitute over half of the country's marine areas under protection. The focus in these OECMs in Canada has been on fishery impacts, looking at sensitive benthos as well as single or multi-species fisheries. And a critical part of the work that was done is to assure the alignment between national and international criteria. And this is critical to facilitate the application of OCMs both within countries to meet national conservation and sustainable use priorities and internationally to jointly address global targets. Another key application is of sustainable use in small-scale fisheries, a very important principle, particularly in developing countries and small island developing states where dependency is high. In these countries, there has been a strong focus on rights-based and co-management approaches with fishing communities to build natural and social capital to co-manage fisheries. So examples come from these countries which have been cited in the Global Biodiversity Outlook published last year, as well as being in the conservation and research literature. An important dimension of the global biodiversity framework is the need for restoration of degraded marine habitats. And it's important to realize that there is great potential for restoration, whether looking at species, and this recent paper by Duarte and colleagues has really pulled together a huge amount of information showing how species recovery can happen with targeted species, with habitats. The increase in interest in restoration of marine habitats is shown by the number of studies published over the recent years, growing exponentially. And then also in fish stocks. Since 2000, this graph on the right shows that the indicators of sustainability in fish stocks show the proportion of fish stocks that are increasing or that are declining or for which there's no change. It's important to realize that the potential for restoration is very real, but it requires very high levels of investment and long time horizons. The restoration must be part of broader measures to reduce pressures and drivers of decline. And there's an increasing need for restoration as the proportion of intact biodiversity has declined and is continuing to decline at the moment. And then finally, there's a particular context for restoration and for nature and ecosystem service provision in more populated areas where people are very dependent on benefits that nature provides. This is really highlighted by the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, that has really emphasized that the ongoing loss of biodiversity should be framed more operationally with respect to the needs, activities and rights of people. Now, the IPBES has shown across these 18 classes of nature's contributions to people, or ecosystem services, that there are three in particular that we have focused on and that are the focus of sectoral economic activities. So provision of energy, provision of food through fishing in the case of the ocean, and mining and extraction for materials. These have really grown. The provisioning of these from nature has grown with technological development and investment by people. But as a result of that, all of these other benefits, there are another 15 classes shown here, from coastal protection through carbon sequestration to culture and recreation. All of these are declining precipitously because of the maximization and the focus we have on these three material ones. And this has really emphasized the need for a new paradigm now to focus away from individual and sectoral approaches to multifunctional seascapes and landscapes, and the need to balance or integrate uses and conservation. Now, this isn't that new. The philosophy is already embodied in the three objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So Objective A, or one on conservation, the second one on sustainable use, and the third one on equitable access and benefit sharing. And now more generally framed in the Sustainable Development Paradigm and goals, so sustaining nature, economic prosperity, and social well-being all together. And herein lies a critical role for data monitoring and indicators, and it's important for future progress to build on the infrastructure that is already there. And in terms of ocean data, this has really grown in recent years and decades around the Global Ocean Observing System, the Marine Biodiversity Observing Network of GEOBON, which are really focused on identifying standards for collecting data, how to bring variables and indicators together to develop essential ocean variables and essential biodiversity variables that can be fed into decision-making processes. Combining this information together is a role that the Ocean Biogeographic Information System and organizations such as the World Conservation Monitoring Center play a strong role in providing products that can be used in policy processes such as the CBD. I'll show just a brief example here. So essential ocean variables, there are, perhaps I'll just highlight these 4 that are focused on habitat state. And I work on coral reefs, and there's a growing amount of work now getting hard coral data and other indicators from coral reefs into indicators and products. So through the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, which is undertaking a global report as we speak, and that this information is feeding into the red listing of species and ecosystems for coral reefs in order to inform policy. And then the next step, which is identified by the Descriptor report released just last week, is the need to use this physical and biological data to meet the needs of more varied and comprehensive measures of value. An emerging focus is to look at the ocean not just as a victim of all this change and suffering decline, but also as a solution for the situation that we find ourselves in. Now, the high-level panel on oceans and the IPCC has really focused on climate mitigation as a focus, in terms of solutions from the ocean. The high-level panel on oceans identified that in meeting the Paris Agreement by 2050, the ocean could provide 21% of the solutions for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. In relation to living ecosystems, so coastal and marine ecosystems in green, and fisheries and aquaculture and dietary shifts in yellow are of particular importance, but there are others. But it's also critically important under the Biodiversity Convention to realize that there are many other benefits that nature provides and many other solutions. And so looking at the co-benefits of protection, for example, and looking at the 30% protection target that is emerging for the framework, economists have calculated a 5-to-1 return of investment across multiple benefit areas for undertaking that degree of protection. Now, it's important to look at broader scenarios to find solutions that may fit different contexts. And so, for example, looking at biodiversity solutions, climate mitigation, and food supply at the same time in the oceans is underway. There's also been a calculation that food supply can increase by 1.5 to 2 times from the ocean through fisheries and mariculture. In raw terms, they calculated food production could increase 6 times, but considering economic dynamics as well, they've put a cap on about 1.5 to 2 times, which is a large amount, an important solution for future populations. And then coming back to the Dasgupta report on the economics of biodiversity, it's important to look at ecosystems as assets, providing diverse portfolios for generating benefits. And here again, the importance of diverse metrics in monitoring frameworks beyond just economic values. But all of these depend on healthy, diverse and productive ecosystems. And in approaching these, the complementarity of ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions must be taken into account and really expanded to achieve the maximum benefit possible across multiple areas for nature and for people. It's important to note that there's variation. We've just looked at the global scale so far, but there's variation by region in both the value or the asset base that different regions have in terms of their ocean assets. So this set of reports by WWF, Boston Consulting Group and regional partners for the Western Indian Ocean and Melanesia identified clearly different values at total asset bases, larger in the large ocean area of the West and South Pacific. But the annual marine product derived from that, or potentially derived from that, has been greater in the Western Indian Ocean to date than in Melanesia. And these regional differences, of course, need to inform policy and planning into the future. I'm going to finish now with just coming to look at the global biodiversity framework in the context of other major ocean and policy processes. Now, of course, within the CBD post-2020 process, the COP15 in Kunming in China is the focus, with the 2050 targets and goals and 2030 milestones to be identified. And in building up towards that, identifying the monitoring framework and the indicators relevant to the ocean are going to be critical in supporting and strengthening its role in sustaining marine and coastal ecosystems. In terms of climate change, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, with COP26 coming up in Glasgow at the end of this year, is of critical importance for the climate biodiversity nexus. In particular, the 5-year update and assessment of the nationally determined contributions in terms of meeting the Paris Agreement, and identifying what nature-based solutions can really work for biodiversity and climate, but also particularly as a subset of a broader supply of ecosystem services and benefits for other aspects of human dependence on nature. United Nations Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular for number 14, the Ocean Conference, the UN Ocean Conference on SDG 14 was to be held in Portugal later this year, but has been postponed to 2022 now. But there may be a UN Special Summit later this year as a milestone towards that. And in this process, the ocean is a critical platform for sustainable development and delivering on a blue economy is a key lever for biodiversity and thinking about contributions from nature to people and how we sustain those into the future. And then through the last year and a half or 2 years, the high-level panel on ocean sustainability has produced this immense science synthesis in the blue papers. The synthesis report has come out, supporting the heads of state alignment and commitment in a transformations document for change. Major elements of that include these 100% sustainable ocean plans and identifying diverse options for countries to select to deliver on ocean health, wealth, equity, knowledge, and finance. And then there's a wide range of other processes on global trade, on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, on deep-sea mining, on global fisheries, in economic and corporate policy fora, interest in the blue economy, particularly at regional levels for development. Regional ocean governance is strengthening and can support a lot of work in ocean regions. And then, of course, the COVID recovery and dealing with the aftermath of the COVID pandemic and building back or building forward from that is going to be critical. And then particular mention should be made of the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainability and the UN Decade on Restoration, both of which are kicking off this year and can be primary delivery mechanisms for the science and the monitoring and indicators that can support or that the Global Biodiversity Framework can provide. So the GBF can really be this global strategy and provide critical guidance and indicators for all of these and have the mandate to guide the planet on ocean sustainability as part of its mandate of assuring nature's assets are sustained for people and for planet. And I'll just finish with bringing it down to the local level and the Global Biodiversity Framework in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I like to present this ring of SDG icons around a local context. Here I've chosen a coastal area in East Africa, but it could be anywhere. And this global vision can really help provide a strategy for supporting local solutions. Biodiversity and climate really need to be addressed together, and the opportunity and necessity of joint aligned targets, actions and measures in the CBD and the UNFCCC COPs in 2021 is a major opportunity. Nature's contributions to people and ecosystem approaches and nature-based solutions are really the foundations for a new paradigm of linking these together and with broader interests as well. The Descriptor Review has really emphasized this new paradigm and particularly the tangible aspect of mainstreaming biodiversity and other measures of success in these other areas. And of course, in building back or forward better from the COVID pandemic to anticipate future shocks and build resilience. And transformations is the word that is on everybody's tongues in these policy processes. And how do we get to that? So the ocean as a foundation for future prosperity can be front and center in the Global Biodiversity Framework and in global processes. So SDG 14 and the Heads of State commitment in the Ocean Panel can really support this process. The blue economy interests in growth and regional ocean governance for sustainable economic activity, I think, are critical. And then providing a supporting framework for monitoring progress through biodiversity and people-relevant indicators. Thank you.